India's second richest man and the head of an airports to ports to power conglomerate is facing charges of bribery and securities fraud in the United States. A US court has indicted Gautam Adani, his nephew Sagar Adani and several other officials for allegedly bribing Indian government officials to obtain solar energy contracts. According to the indictment, Adani allegedly paid bribes to the tune of over 2,000 crore rupees. This is the first time that an Indian business leader of this stature is facing such serious charges. The Adani group has dismissed the allegations as baseless, while the White House insists that the ties between the two nations are strong enough to navigate the crisis. While the US authorities are yet to notify on the next course of action, it is clear that the business tycoon is staring at a protracted legal battle. We're now joined by David W. Simon, partner, Foley and Lardner LLP. Thank you very much, David, for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you, this is a securities and wire fraud. In the history of American jurisprudence, how serious is this case, the evidence on the table compared to previous such cases?
It's a very serious case. And I think, as you know, there's also an FCPA bribery component to it, not charged against the Adanis, but some of the other defendants. It's a serious case. It's very hard to tell what the full evidence is in the U.S. system. The indictment just lays out the bare bones allegations. The evidence comes later. So too early to judge that, but the charges themselves are serious.
Right. How does one calculate the fine that they may have to give? Now, as per the indictment, help us understand, is it possible that the US court may now ask them to deposit a certain sum of money, or that will come only at the stage of settlement or at the end of the case?
So there are two aspects to the case. There's an SEC civil case, and then there's a Department of Justice criminal case. These are all charged against individuals, not against the companies, at least so far. And we don't know what the requests are going to be, but typically in the U.S. system, there's no deposit of a fine up front, something that would come later. The criminal case is going to seek imprisonment of any criminal defendant who's convicted. Corporate fines, if there's corporate charges, would come later.
Right. So is it right to say that there is an arrest warrant against them, or not as yet?
That is what the papers say, that there has been, the release says there are arrest warrants that have been issued.
Right. But so you're saying that is there in the indictment papers, that there is an arrest warrant against them?
I believe it's in the DOJ press release that they say that arrest warrants have been issued for the defendants.
Okay. So this means that all the 9 accused, including Gautam Adani and his nephew Sagar Adani, they cannot travel to the United States.
I think that's fair to say without being arrested, yes. And, we don't know whether there are red notices that have been filed with, Interpol or international authorities, but I think they're at risk of being arrested if they travel outside of India.
Can that be in any country, or is it only in the United States where they will be immediately arrested?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think there is risk of traveling internationally.
I would also like to ask you, David, that if $250 million was the bribe amount that the US government has managed to calculate, and they're accusing all 9 of them, including Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani, of making gains in the US markets, raising capital for solar projects at the same time, how would the fine be calculated? I believe that there is a certain formula that is used to calculate a fine, and how high could that be?
So it's very complicated. The fines in the U.S. system typically, back to the point we were discussing before, it's typically for the corporate, not for the individuals. There is a system in place for calculating fines that's for corporates that's a formula-based, and it's driven by 2 factors. One is the value of the bribe paid, and two, it's the benefit received by the company from the bribery scheme. So, I think the allegation in the indictment is it was a $2 billion contract that was being sought through the bribery scheme. And so that is the main driver of the fines. It could get extremely high. I would think hundreds of millions of dollars would be potentially at risk.
Right. And going through the indictment and the SEC documents, prima facie, how strong is the evidence against all of them? Can Gautam Adani, because right now the statement that has come from the Adani Group that all these charges mentioned in the indictment are baseless and are denied completely.
Yeah, very difficult to tell from the indictment itself. It's an outline of allegations. It doesn't. The government is not obliged to outline all of its evidence in support of its allegations in the indictment. I do think it's interesting that the Adanis themselves were not charged in the bribery scheme, that others were. And a lot of the evidence that's cataloged, that is included and cataloged in the indictment, is about the bribery scheme. So I think it's premature to reach any conclusions about the strength of the case. I would say, the Department of Justice in the U.S. Doesn't bring cases lightly, and they don't bring cases that they don't think they can win in court. So, it's something to be taken very, very seriously.
Right. David, what do you see is the exact charge? If you were to break it down for our viewers, you're saying that Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani have not been charged for the bribery case specifically. It is for Azure Power and executives, consultants of Azure Power. But what is the exact charge? Because broadly what we read is that they were involved in a bribery, in orchestrating a bribery scheme. So if you were to explain the exact charge against Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani in both the SEC and the DOJ, what would that be?
So it appears to me to be securities and wire fraud, which are sort of generic, not disclosing, misrepresenting to investors and potential investors, or not disclosing, material facts to investors or prospective investors. My best guess from reading the indictment is that the DOJ believes that these two were participating in the bribery scheme, but they may not have jurisdiction under the FCPA to proceed against them, which is why they're relying on these other charges. That's the best I can tell. I think FCPA jurisdiction, while broad for non-U.S. citizens and non-officers and directors of U.S. issuers, which the Adanis are not, the government would have to show acts in furtherance of the bribery scheme in the United States. And I don't see any allegations of that in the indictment.
So what happens next in this case? The indictment has been opened. The SEC has issued a statement. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, the question is going to be, I think, whether the defendants will appear in the United States to defend the charges, or whether they will, whether the DOJ will initiate extradition proceedings and they fight extradition from India. To me, that will be the sort of the first big decision and development in the case. If they decide to defend in the U.S., there'll be an appearance before the court, an entry of a plea, presumably a plea of not guilty, and then they'll start, preparing for trial. Typically, a complex case like this in the United States will take at least a couple of years from indictment to trial. So I wouldn't expect any, immediate rapid activity in the case. I suspect it's going to take some time.
Right. What is the route for settlement if they want to settle this either out of court or through a plea bargain?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, the DOJ piece would be a plea bargain, that's always an option. in the US, a very high percentage of criminal charges are resolved short of trial through a plea bargain. That's the norm, frankly. But it's a question of what what individual defendants are prepared to plead guilty to. That's always subject to intense negotiation between the Department of Justice and Defense Counsel. But on the criminal case, it's a plea agreement is the way this gets resolved. It's
Right.
SEC, more of a civil settlement.
Right. And in both cases, the settlement fine would be very high, I assume.
I think so. Although again, the fines tend to be very high against the corporates, and there aren't corporates involved here. The DOJ proceeding is seeking, incarceration. I mean, it's a criminal case that's the outcome that sort of one should expect.
Right. And it's broadly a negative for them when they try to raise more capital anywhere in the world. Banks would raise questions about these proceedings that are going on. My final question to you, David, would be the change in administration. We've been reading that the Trump administration could actually sign off on some sort of a deal to get this all cleared. Is that possible? How easy or difficult is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, and a lot of companies that are dealing with DOJ issues are asking themselves that same question. These cases are typically brought by career civil servants that have been working on the case for, and it's clear in this case that they've been investigating for a couple of years at least. These proceedings tend not to be heavily influenced by political developments, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the United States right now about what the Department of Justice is going to look like under the new administration, and the role of politics is going to play in Department of Justice proceedings. A lot of us are wondering that and asking these questions. I don't think anybody knows, but I would tell you the norm is a change of administration tends not to have a material impact on these kinds of cases. The Department of Justice has historically, proceeded independently with their own investigations based on the facts and the law. And historically, there's not been heavy political involvement in cases like this. This is obviously high profile and does rise to a higher level of attention. But I think the short answer to the question is we just don't know at this point how that's likely to play out.
All right, David, thank you so much for joining us with those very important views. It's very interesting to see how things pan out, but clearly a very complicated case for everyone indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice, and the SEC charges also are extremely serious as well. Thank you once again for being with us here on the program.
Thank you.
That's all the time we had on News Center. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.